Hello everyone, Rob here, and today I'm going to be covering how to set up Radius on Windows Server 2019 using EAP-TLS for authentication. Depending on your environment, you may be thinking of using something such as EAP-PEEP. Microsoft calls it EAP-PEEP-MSCHAP version 2. And MSCHAP version 2 was cracked back in 1999, and it's still being used because it's still being used by people. And that is mostly because it's available and there's documentation on it. However, it's not a secured protocol, and I don't recommend using it to send credentials even if it's through an encrypted tunnel. So, without getting too much more of a rant on that, what I'd like to get more on is the EAP-TLS. So what that is a server authenticates to the client using an identity certificate or key authentication, and the client authenticates to the server using key authentication or, using a certificate. So to get that set up, we of course need a certificate authority in our environment, and we need to create our template that's going to be used for client authentication and server authentication. So to do that, we open our certificate authority. Do that, we go to Tools, Certificate Authority, and then under here we're going to drop down My CA, go to Certificate Templates, right click and select Manage. And we are going to duplicate the RAS and IAS server template. Now this is going to be good for client authentication and server authentication. Down here, if we want to have it so only a server is authenticating, the RAS and IAS server would be good for that. Only the server is going to be able to authenticate with that cert. If we use workstation authentication for our template, that's only going to be good for the clients. It will not work for the server. Which is fine if you want to do that. It's set up in a similar means. However, I'm going to be using this one, our RAS and IAS server, and we're going to use that to create our certificate template here. So I right click, duplicate template, leave these defaults. The versioning here is excellent for auto renewals and auto assignment, so we're going to leave that as is. General, we're going to call this Radius Server Client, since it's going to be good for both, and we're going to publish to Active Directory. For request handling, you'll notice Allow Private Key to be Exported is not selected. This is definitely what we want because we don't want the key to be exported because we only want that one client or one machine to be able to authenticate to the server. So we leave that unchecked. Under cryptography, I'm leaving 2048. If you are, for example, in a college and you have everyone getting out of class at the same time with 3 or 4 devices on them that are going to be connecting to your internet, you may want to cut this down to 1024, and that is to help save bandwidth and speed up the process so you're getting as much value out of your bandwidth as possible. However, 2048 should be good in most cases. Also, don't mess with these either. This is important to have the RSA S-channel cryptographic provider selected. The other thing we need to set, so in subject name, we just can't have this value here being none. Anything else there should be fine. I'm just leaving the default at common name and leave DNS name selected here. Now for our permissions, we go to the Security tab. I'm going to remove my personal user account here because I'm only going to rely on groups. Leave the defaults for admin and enterprise admin. For RAS and IAS servers, we want to give them enroll and auto enroll permissions. Now, because I'm going to be using this certificate for client authentication as well as server authentication, I'm going to be adding domain computers to this as well. So domain computers, check names. And now that value is added. I need enroll and auto enroll permissions. You can uncheck read if you like. Read permissions really isn't going to hurt anything, so I'll uncheck it just to do it. And then I'm going to click OK to create my template. And now I have Radius Server Client. Now what I need to do is I can close this out and go back to my Cert authority here, and I right-click on Certificate Templates again, only this time I go to New, Certificate Template to Issue, and then I want to select the one I just created, which is Radius Server Client. I will now be able to assign that certificate template out to the devices in my environment. If you have multiple domain controllers in your environment, you will want to force a DC replication by going to Active Directory or your domain controller, go to Tools, Active Directory, Sites and Services, and then you scroll down, I think it's like Sites something, and you want to find the NTDS settings for the other domain controllers in your environment. Right click and select Force Replication. I only have one server in my environment, so I'm not going to be able to show you that, but this is where it would be. You would click something that says along the lines of Force Replication. I have a PowerShell commandlet as well that I created to do this automatically for you. As long as Windows Remote Management or WinRM is enabled in your environment, the commandlet will work great for you. And I'll have a link to that in the description. So now that I have the certificate over here, what I'm going to do is go over to my domain controller, and to install the NPS or the Network Policy Service role, I would click Add Roles and Features, then Next, 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 and the only thing I need to select is this value here, Network Policy and Access Services. I would then click Next all the way through to install it. As soon as that's installed, the server does not need a restart. You can just start configuring your settings. So now now that that's installed, I go to Tools, Network Policy Server, and I'm going to make this bigger so we can see everything here. One thing you want to do first is if you right-click on MPS Local here, select Register Server in Active Directory, and what that does is add this local machine or your domain controller to the RAS and IAS servers group, which is going to allow it to obtain that server certificate template we just created. It is recommended to install Radius or the NPS or Network Policy Server on a domain controller because it works best with authentication and such. If you have multiple domain controllers in your environment, I would suggest configuring installing this role on multiple domain controllers. And then what we're going to do later is set up a load balancing and failover. So we'll get there when we get there. Right now, first, we're going to set up Radius clients. By Radius clients, they are not referring to laptops, desktops, phones, and things of that nature. This is your access points. Your 802.1x switches, your VPN, things of that nature. So if we right-click and go to New, we can add, one thing that's nice here is we can also add a subnet. So say I have, maybe the first few addresses are my access points. So I could do main office AP range, and then for my address range, it would be 192.168.5.0/30, say. And this way I know all of my APs are in there. However, I would suggest that you do each one individually just so you have a better idea of what's what and what client policy is being connected to. So I'm going to right-click, select New. And now this time I'm going to leave enable the Radius client so that it gets used. And also, if it wasn't clear, what we're doing by creating this policy is defining a client that's allowed to send authentication requests to the Radius server or to this NPS service. So I'm going to call this main office AP1. And we'll pretend it has an IP address of 192.168.5.3. And then for a shared secret here, I have a PowerShell one I like to use for generation here, and I saved it over here. And let me just copy this and paste it. And now I have my shared secret generated. So this is what I'm going to use for that. One thing I'm going to do here, can I get out of this? So I'm just going to paste this in here for right now. And under advanced, we have radius standard. That is typically going to work for your vendors in most situations. If the documentation on your wireless LAN controller or whatever tells you to specify otherwise, then do so. 9 times out of 10, you're going to be using radius standard, and this is going to work. Notice down here under additional options, you have access request messages must contain the message authenticator attribute. Now we're using EAP-TLS. The EAP framework uses the message authenticator attribute by default. So we're going to leave this blank. You can check this if you want, but it's going to cause errors because it's going to be looking for a second message authenticator and comparing different values. So you're going to get event logs, errors in your event log that are going to be misleading. So leave that unlocked or unchecked. Now I click OK to create my client. The next thing I'm going to do here is drop down template management, and I'm going to go to shared secrets, right click, new, and here I'm going to call this radius authentication, and I'm going to paste my secret in here. And now I'm going to generate another secret here, and here's me copy this value, and this is going to be for accounting. So I'm going to right click on shared secrets again, new, and I'm going to call this radius accounting. And then I'm going to paste the value in here and click OK. Now what that's doing is creating a template so that I don't mistype the password, or maybe I've copied something wrong or not the entire string. This ensures that the correct value is used every time. So now I'm going back to my clients. I'm going to edit main office AP1. And I want to select my shared secrets template as radius authentication. And then I click OK. So that's why I did that. You're going to have more than one client most likely because you'll have more than one access point in your environment. You can add as many as you need to. Now that we have the client added, we're going to go to our radius server group. And I have 2 here created already just to save me some time. So I'm going to open up main radius. And under here, I have a couple radius servers already. We're going to add one just so I can show you what's going on. I call this main radius, and notice priority value 1 and priority value 2 and weight 50. Weight 50 is a percentage value, so that's a number of 1 to 100, and it's going to be 50% of the clients are sent to one radius server, 50% are sent to the other radius server. Now, if this 192.168.137.40 is a Windows server, we need to install this network policy server role on that server as well. That way, it can authenticate as using radius. So now, if I were to add, this is how we add a server here. So I click Add. I'm going to add another fake value 192.168. What were they here? 137.41, say. Now I'm going to Authentication and Accounting tab. Notice the default radius ports are selected, which is 1812 for authentication, 1813 for accounting. We're going to use the radius authentication shared secrets template. And notice the request must contain the message authenticator attribute. We are not checking that. If for some reason we have that checked in the server one because our config is not going to use EAP-TLS and it's going to use something that doesn't use EAP, we would need to check this box in order to use the message authenticator attribute. We're already using it, so we're not going to check that box. Now down here, I'm going to uncheck use the same shared secret for authentication and accounting, and then I'm going to select my radius accounting shared secret template. That way I have one shared secret for authentication and one shared secret for accounting. Another thing down here is the forward network access server start and stop notifications to the server. Uncheck that box. It creates a lot of unnecessary network traffic, and this is going to free up bandwidth on your network. Under load balancing, because this is my third server here, I'm going to add this priority 3, and I need to change my percentages. So I'm going to do this one as, so I'll leave this one as 50, say, or no, we'll just do 33, right? Leave that at 33. Now I need to modify these so that they add up to 100. So this is going to be 33 as well. And also, I'm going to set my accounting shared secret template here and my authentication shared secret template up here. And uncheck that box because I don't want that going on. And I click OK. And I need to do the same thing for my localhost. Now notice here I have the loopback address set. That is because if you have the IP address of your local server, it will return an error and resolve to the localhost anyway. So I'm going to edit that, leave the defaults, just set my templates, uncheck that box. That one's unchecked. Use my accounting secret. And then load balancing, we'll say this one's 34. Okay. So now that I have all those values set, I have my server group. And again, those priorities with 1, 2, and 3 are for load balancing. So that if I start getting a ton of radius authentication requests at once, I'm able to handle those at my radius server and distribute them however needed. So I click OK. Over here I have failover radius. What this is a failover profile. So if for some reason the main profile here fails, it jumps over to this profile. Now I'm going to add my second server here, which was 192, or my third server I should say, 192.168.137.41. And then we're going to use authentication and accounting and uncheck this box, and that's unchecked. Load balancing is going to be 2 and 50. Also, anytime you configure your servers in here, you have to configure that priority number. And also you have to make sure your numbers add up, otherwise you're going to get some issues. So now that that is done, I click OK. This failover profile exists here. However, if this server is being restarted, you may want to configure that exact profile on the other server as well. That way, when the authentic requests fail to this server, they go to the other one and they're still able to authenticate okay. So now we have our clients configured, our server groups configured. The next thing we need to do is our connection request policies. You don't necessarily have to create a connection request policy. You can get away with only configuring a network policy. However, I'd suggest creating one just to have it defined. So we right click on it and go to new. We're going to call this typically, I'm going to be descriptive here, so pretend my SSID or my wireless network name is NSA VAN -099, and I'm going to call this Radius Server Authentication and Authorization, because that's what this policy is all about. Leave the type of network access server unspecified. If you're using this for RDP or a remote desktop gateway or for a VPN, you can select one of the other options. However, when unspecified, it works as needed. So here we click Next. Under Conditions, we want to add our NAS or Network Access Server port type and click Add. And here we're selecting Wireless 802.11. And under Others, we want Wireless-Other and click OK. And this is how we are configuring the things for EAP-TLS. So that's what we need for that. Now we click Next. Under Authentication, we're going to leave Authenticate requests on this server. Same thing with accounting. We're going to not check forward accounting requests. The NPS or Network Policy Server can be used for radius authentication, or it can be used as a proxy, where the NPS server takes radius requests and forwards them off onto the radius servers in the environment. The way to basically make this a radius proxy would be if in my server group I did not configure a loopback address with that 127.0.0.1. That would be all remote servers. And if that was the case, I would be selecting the second option here and then defining my profile. If I were to select this right now, having that loopback value is going to return errors, and the only successful authentication is going to happen on the other servers that are configured as load balancers in that environment. I'm second guessing myself on that because of how I have my radius set up. It may just be failing over to the failover policy and going from there. So one of those two things is happening. But in any case, it's not going to work. So if you have the 127.0.0.1 set in your radius server group, leave the default value here. Accounting, same thing, don't define anything with that loopback defined in the server group. So now I click next. Leave this blank. You can override authentication methods here. However, we don't want to do that. We're going to define ours in our network policy. And then here we have attribute, standard, and vendor specific. We're going to leave all those blank. I'll cover them more in the network policy. This shows us an overview. I click finish, and now I've created our connection request policy. Next thing I need to do is create a network policy. So I right click on this, select new. I'm going to call this, I typically like to call this the protocol I'm using, so EAP-TLS. And I'm going to leave this as unspecified again. A lot of these options you'll notice are the same. I'm going to click add and then scroll down to NAS port type, and then we're selecting wireless 802.11 and wireless other. And then we click OK. Click next. Leave access granted. Notice there's a checkbox down here that says access is determined by user dial-in properties. What that is referring to is if you, on your domain controller, go to Tools, Active Directory, Users and Computers, and then if I select my name under dial-in, these are those properties it's referring to. So you can leave control access through MPS network policy, or you can define these individually for each person if you want. That's kind of a lot of work. It's best just to do it through the network policy and ignore this completely. So that's what I do. However, your situation, that may make more sense for you to do it a different way. So back to our NPS setup here. I'm going to leave access granted, and I'm not checking that box because I don't want to use the dial-in properties. I click next. I'm going to uncheck the less secure authentication methods because we're not going to be using a password for authentication. This is just certificate authentication. I click add and leave it on smart card or other cert and click OK, and then click next. Now you can define your idle timeout or login restrictions. That's all dependent on your environment if you want to do that. For NAS port type, I select wireless 802.11 again and then wireless other and click next. And now we have a couple values here. So with radius attribute standard, you may have something, for example, like with Meraki dashboard, excuse me, their radius server has a filter-ID attribute you can use. And if you define the filter ID attribute, it is looking for a security group in the Meraki dashboard with that defined value for filter ID. So for example, here I can click add, and then filter ID, add, and then I add a string value here. Notice string is selected, and I would say security group, group 1, and click OK, and then OK again. And then if I close this, you can see I added the filter ID. So now that attribute's going to be used, and Meraki is going to associate the values and settings you have with security group 1 and apply to any of these radius clients. Another thing you might want to do here is if we click add and what would it be called here? Framed MTU. I'm going to click add here. So, and I'm going to set this to 1344 just right now while I talk about it. And I click close. Now that framed MTU, what that is, maximum transmission unit, that by default is sent to 1500. So if you have Radius clients that are authenticating fine in your environment, however, the Radius clients on the other side of a firewall are not authenticating okay, it may be because the packets are being silently rejected because they're too large and being broken up in order to be forwarded through the firewall. So in order to adapt to that, you can change the maximum transmission unit size and make that 1344 and slowly increment it to there with a maximum of 1500, which is the default value. So that's what that's about. I'm going to remove that since I don't have a firewall in the way, and I'm removing filter IDs since I don't have Meraki dashboard to use. So you can add IP filters, some IP settings where a server must, just leave the defaults here. Server settings, determine IP address assignment. For the encryption, if you can, leave all these enabled if you know you have a lot of legacy clients. Your ultimate goal should be to hopefully achieve this where only strongest encryption is selected. And that way you're ensuring that encryption is used and the strongest version available is being used. So I click Next. This is a summary of all our selections. I click Finish. And now notice EAP-TLS, this is processing order 3. I'm going to right click and select Move Up, Move Up. That way it's processed first and there's no delay in processing these policies. They get processed in order, so of course 1 gets processed first, then 2, then 3, and so on. And same thing for connection request policies. Process first, if there's another one that gets second, and third and fourth, and so on. Now that we have all that configured, we go to the accounting tab here, click configure accounting, then we click next, log to a text file on the local computer. If you want to use a SQL database or your, because you have your billing people based on this usage, you can set that up. However, for just like a local environment where you're just one company or organization, logging to a text file should be fine. You can use the PowerShell commandlet select-string to kind of grep values out of the text file. You can also open something in Notepad, do Control F for find, and search for a value that you're looking for. So now I click Next, leave all the defaults. I like to leave this location because I know where it's at. It also takes admin permissions to get there. And then I click Next. This is a summary of everything I selected. Click Next and close. And now accounting is configured on my MPS server. So now that MPS is all configured, I'm going to close that out. And I'm going to go to my tools and group policy. And what we're going to do with group policy is we need to, for one, ensure that our chain of trust is trusted, or our CA certificate is trusted and pushed out to the clients. We also want auto renewal turned on, as well as the ability for the computers to get the certificates they need, or request certificates they need, the auto enrollment for when they expire. And we also will need to configure a wireless profile that will be used, and that is because machine authentication is used, and that needs to be specified in the profile. And each one of your users is not going to be able to figure out how to do that, basically. So if we right click, I have settings radius set up here. I right click, and actually before I go further, notice I have domain computers assigned here. This is to help ensure that they're able to get the information they need. Technically, authenticated users should include them. However, there have been instances where it seemed like adding domain computers gave the permissions required to assign the settings I was trying to assign, and authenticated users wasn't good enough. So I'd usually try to add something extra if I need it. So I right-click, settings radius, click edit. And computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, security settings, and now we have public key policies, which I'm going to cover first. So under here, you'll notice in Trusted Root Certificate Authorities and Intermediate Certificate Authorities, I have my Root CA certificate. And this is the top branch, the top of the chain of trust for my private key infrastructure. So I have that in Intermediate and Trusted Root. It's here as well. The other thing I have under Automatic Certificate Request Settings, if you right-click here, go to New, Automatic Certificate Request, click Next. The only one you should need for this is to have Computer selected. I've also added Enrollment Agent. This is not required for automatic enrollment. However, I add it just to be safe. So those are those. Back under Public Key Policies, under that main tree, we have two other values that we need to set here. So Certificate Services Client, Certificate Enrollment Policy. I double-click that. We want to make sure this is enabled. We make sure this is checked. And if we click Properties, you can see that these require strong validation during enrollment. These are selected. If they're not, select them, and then click OK. And then click OK. So now we've enabled certificate enrollment. Now we want to enable auto enrollment, which is this value here, Certificate Services Client Auto Enrollment. Double click that, ensure it's enabled. Check these two boxes so that certs get updated and renewed, and expired ones get removed, and remove revoked certificates. Leave 10% because that's fine, and click OK. We now have the certificate assignment and trust things all configured how we need. The next thing we need to do is build our wireless profile. So we can do that by right-clicking and create a new Windows XP policy. Let me delete this one and see if that changes anything. So yeah, create a new wireless network policy for Windows Vista and later releases. That's the value we want to select, not the XP policy. So we're going to call this, usually a good name for it is your SSID. So mine was NSA van-099, and we'll call this radius profile. And radius profile for NSA van-099. So that's my description. Leave this value checked. Use Windows Wireless LAN Auto Config Service for clients. Down here we're going to add our SSID, so we click Add. Infrastructure. If you're not familiar, ad hoc is typically machine to machine, where infrastructure is, an environment and infrastructure. So that's going to be your selection the majority of the time. It'd be very rare to select ad hoc. Now I'm going to call this profile NSA van-099. And that's also the name of my SSID, so I'm going to call that here as well. Click Add. Now, notice I have Connect Automatically when the network is in range. This way people can connect automatically and they don't have to do anything special. You're taking care of it for them. Connect to a more preferred network if available. This will allow clients to connect to other SSIDs if they want to. And down here, connect even if the network is not broadcasting. If you are hiding an SSID, you should check that box. This way people automatically connect to it even though it's not broadcasting. If you are hiding your SSID, which I don't suggest doing, you are suggesting that there's something to hide to an attacker. If you are hiding your SSID, I would suggest doing the best you can to make sure that SSID values in the air only as far as your property line, and that you handle that by controlling the power on your Wi-Fi signal that your APs are giving off. The best you can do with that ensures that people will block away or not able to see your SSID and try to connect to it in some way. Next thing here, we go to security. We're going to leave WPA2 Enterprise since we're using Radius. Leave AES CCNP. You can try selecting GCNP, however, it's not going to work and it's just going to default back to CCNP. which is fine because that's secure. Here we have PEEP. We don't want that selected. We're using smart card or other certificate. And then we click Properties here, and notice use a certificate on this computer, use simple cert selection, which is recommended, verify the server's identity by validating the certificate, and then scroll down here, and I have a couple CAs from other times, but just ensure all your CAs are selected so that they're trusted. And you can also select don't prompt user to authorize new servers or trusted cert authorities. It's going to be rare that this comes up. However, if you are an admin, you may want to leave this unchecked in case you need to do this for some reason because you updated something or whatever, and a computer hasn't been turned on in a while, and now it needs to authenticate to something new. That's why you would probably leave that unchecked. If you want to prevent your users from doing anything you don't want them to, you could leave that checked. It's preference, I would say, at that point. So I click OK. And now down here, we're not using user or computer authentication. We're using computer authentication. So be sure to check that. Max authentication failures, we will leave that at 1. And we're going to cache user info for subsequent connections to this network. This ensures they can auto-connect easily. Under advanced, you can set some things such as single sign-on if you have that going. And you can set other things such as the max equal start messages sent or start period, things of that nature. I just leave these as they are. So I click OK here, and now that is added. If I go to the Network Permissions tab, you'll notice that it is here as well, the one I just created. You can prevent connections to ad hoc networks if you desire, depending on how restrictive you want to be for your clients while they're connected to this wireless profile. You can select what you need to here. Right now I'm leaving only these two selected, and this is I'm not being very restrictive in doing so, which is okay because there might be situations where some of these things need to be used. And also notice down here I see Windows 7. One thing I'm going to mention about that is Windows 7, for one, has had some issues with authenticating with Radius, and this is due to some of the stronger encryption methods being used with TLS 1.2. Windows 8.1 in particular also has this issue. They released a Windows patch for it that was supposed to fix anything that was using TLS version 1.2 with the SHA-512 hash. Windows 8.1 is not able to interpret that, and the patch is supposed to fix that issue. So now that we have all that set, I'm going to click OK, and I have my Radius profile created in group policy. Now my clients should be able to, as long as they have the Radius certificate on them, they should be able to authenticate to my network policy server. And just to make sure that service is going, you go to Tools, Services, well, we'll do it this way, services.msc. Well, and our service is called the Network Policy Server, so you can start and restart from here. And the other thing, just in case I forgot to mention it, under Network Policy Server, let me open it again, Tools, Network Policy Server, we want to make sure we right-clicked on NPS Local and selected Register Server in Active Directory. That is all I had to cover for you. Thanks for watching. If you have questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. And I do love subscribers, so if you can subscribe, please do that. Thank you.